From District 6, I was born in the Villiers Street. I went to a school, I normally ask people, do you know where School of Industry is? Actually, I'm going to ask you, do you know where School of Industry is? Do you know where Trafalgar is?
Trafalgar, yes.
Yes. Do you know where Golding was?
I went to Golding.
Okay, you went to Golding. So you don't know where School of Industry was? School of Industry was something like the club, like Casablanca. All the locals. Now, in School of Industry, you would find the people from Eaton Place, Canterbury Street, where the DKs was in Caledon Street. All the people, the children from those areas used to go to School of Industry. In other words, Kaalvoete, a gat in die broek. That was School of Industry. Now, School of Industry is about 70 meters from Parliament. Now, me going to School of Industry, I've actually realized that as a big man now, I used to ask myself, Cass, why didn't you want to go to school? I didn't want to go to school. I only went to school to Standard 1. Now, what did you learn from Step A to Standard 1? I've learned nothing from school, And the reason why I ask myself that question now, why didn't you want to go to school? And my answer to that is, I always liked nice things in life. Even as a young boy, I used to like nice girls, nice things, I didn't know it at that time because I was too young. Mm-hmm. And I asked myself that question now, why didn't you want to go to school? And this is my answer, because there wasn't nice things for me. And there wasn't nice children for me. No, they weren't cool enough, So I decided, no, I'm not going to go to school anymore. I was about 8 years old. And then I hit the streets. I always tell people that I know every dirt bin and every lane and every fig tree and nukwa tree from Devil's Peak to Tambuskloof. I know every door where they're going to give me a piece of bread. I can knock on the door. Madam, have you got a piece of bread, please? I used to collect empty bottles, cardboard. I used to take the people's milk money out of the bottles in the morning. It was called survival. And I was only 8 years old. But even being 8 years old, I came home with 25 cents from my mother. Because I used to scuttle. I used to be around. I used to sell newspapers. I used to sell empty bottles. I used to sell anything that can be sold, Then I was selling Argus. I was selling Argus in Rowland Street. I was selling Argus up in Mill Street, where Millie's was. That's basically how I grew up, As a poor little black boy, walking Kaalvoete in the street, sleeping in cars, sleeping in landings. You know what a landing is? Landing is when you go up to a building in the stairs and you find a landing, and from the landing you go to the different houses. That is where I used to sleep as a young boy. And I used to sleep in broken cars and in broken buildings and houses, until I was about 12 years old. Then my mother decided, no, we're going to send him to a reformatory. We're going to send him away. And they took me down to the Child Life. Now, when you talk Queen Victoria Street in those days, if they take you to Queen Victoria Street, you don't come back home until you're 21 years old. So my mother and my father took me down there to the Child Life. And they said, listen, this child don't want to go to school and and he must be sent away. There was a white woman there and she said to me, why don't you want to go to school? What do you want to do? And I said, no, ma'am, I want to work. I'd rather go and work. And she said, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to give you, I think it was 2 weeks or something. And she said, if you don't find a job in that time, then we're going to have to send you away until you are 21 years old. And then I got a job in Plain Street, in Cuthbert's building on the 3rd floor. And that's when I started working from 12 years old. I was earning 5 rand a week. And I worked in every street in town. Long Street, St. George's Street, Loop Street, Harrington Street, Barrick Street, all the streets I've worked in. As a young boy, I've done messenger jobs, cleaning jobs, delivery boy, you name it, I've been there. So I've done a lot of stuff. I was about 15 years old then when I started the music thing. We're doing parties, little parties in people's houses. In District 6, we used to call it a bob. One day I was working in Woodstock and I was going to the bank for my boss. And I walked past this building which I used to frequent as a teenager. And it was called the Stardust at that time. So I saw a big to let sign on the building. And then I thought, now, this would be nice for a club. And I wrote the number on my hand. And I went to the bank, I came back, went to my boss, and I said, call him to the window. Because we could see the building from the window. And I said to him, listen here, don't you want to rent that building for me? And I can open a club there. And because he had a lot of trust in me, you know, he knew that I was like a go-getter. You know, he called the owner of the building, the number that I gave him, and the guy said, yes, we can have a look at the building. But because he was an old man, he couldn't come himself. So we had to send the former owner that had the Stardust nightclub. He sent that guy to open the place for us and showed us where the electricity switches are and whatever. So as we got inside, there was basically nothing inside. The Stardust Club was, it was a club where there was live bands. Because in those days, they weren't like discos. It was all bands, like Richard John Smith used to sing with the Triangles and all the bands. Vaders and the Triangles and the Paid Setters. There was many bands in those days. It was just bands. So I used to frequent that place as a young boy. I must have been about 16, 17 years old. And there wasn't much in it. There was no disco lights and the lights that you find today. So we were in the building looking at it, and I said, yes, I'll take it. And then we got a lease on the building, and the rental was 250 rand a month. But believe me, with the 250 rand a month, I was still in arrears with my rent. That's how I got the club. That was in 1971, 72. I left the driver's job and I was now working at the building there, trying to get this club open. But it took me a whole year before anybody came, you know. It was so bad that I couldn't pay the rent. You know, I used to get like maybe 10 people in the club, or 20 people in the club, and take that money and go on a Monday and say to the landlord, listen, this is what I've made. I want to pay it towards the rent. And he would say, okay, Mr. Isaac, now you owe me 350 and your balance now, how much is there? 50 rand. Okay, we'll deduct the 50, now you owe me 300 rand. After a year of struggling and building up the club slowly, you know, building up. When I say building up, I'm talking about basically cleaning it out. You know, because all we had in there was benches on the sides, running around. That was basically it. And I used to camouflage a lot of the stuff inside the club, you know. I used to MacGyver. Because the ceiling was skewed, it was going to fall in any moment. And I used to put sacking, you know, the sacking, I used to put it underneath. Got into the club, and then after a year of struggling, it took off. Oh my God. It must have been 10 rand or something, because I remember with the matinees we used to charge 5 cents. So after that year, then the club took off. Now you see, in those days, like I said, there weren't many clubs and DJs, and I couldn't find a DJ. Because in those days there were mobile DJs, like Eli's Coming. You remember that name? Yes. Eli's Coming and some other. I had to become the DJ. I had to become the DJ of the club because I couldn't find a DJ. So I DJ'd. The rapping, you know, as the music played, you rap along. movements behind the microphone and stuff like that, rapping and shouting and screaming. I had a 50-watt audible set that I bought from Melody Inn in the garden center, on the book, of course. So 50 watts in those days were, I suppose it was good. But in today's time, I mean, the taxi driver drives around with 1,000 watt, even more. I mean, I used to buy like LPs from the Flames. My first LP I bought was Burning Soul. Records from Tom Jones, because I love to sing Tom Jones. And I used to lay on the bed, because in those days there were no TVs. So I used to lay on the bed and close my eyes, and I could actually see Tom Jones. And when TVs finally came, and I watched Tom Jones on TV, and it was exactly the way I pictured it. So in those days, I bought a lot of LPs and 7 singles and stuff. You know, I have a thing for beat in music. I can tell you if that is nice or it's not nice. I did not buy LPs that's in. In those days, it was Motown music, you know, like Marvin Gaye, Barry White, all those Motown, Atlantic Soul. That was the music that I played in those days. You see, beautiful music. Up till now, today, if I must go and buy a record, I won't buy something because it's in. I want to listen to it, and I will tell you, no, I don't want it. Even if it's the latest or whatever, if it hasn't got that beat in it, you know, you need to know what makes people move. It doesn't have to be the latest song. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't have to be a new release. Now, this is what people do because they want to have this release or that release or that release. It's all new music, but it doesn't mean it's good. You need to move me. Because I was a dancer. I used to dance, brother. When I'm in that DJ box, I am wet from the top right down. And I send signals out to the people here. Because there's no lights that can attract them. There's no decor that can attract them. It's just me and you. It's just me and you. You know what I'm saying? And even the building used to sweat. Even the walls used to sweat. You know, let me tell you, I've had most probably wannabe DJs used to come there and pay to come inside. Little boys. They used to pay to come inside there. Just to come and see, and they would stay, they won't dance. They stand there the whole night, just watching you. Just watching you. So you see, the DJs that came after me picked up from me. You understand what I'm saying? Because you must remember, there's nowhere else where they can go to get schooling. You see, even the other boys that used to come, they want to be DJs. There's no other place where they can go and see this live, where they can learn from, the rapping, the movement, everything that goes with it. They could come there. It was like home to them. I've had, like I said, I had a lot of guys there. But being an entertainer, I know what's good. I would put a guy in that box there, and I will remove him again in 20 minutes. And I'll put somebody else in there again. Like I would take a break. I would take a break while I'm busy DJing. This is how it happens. If I was working for me, selling cool drinks, basically working in a bar, but he had a flair because he used to dance. Sometimes he used to come from the bar, he used to dance there, you know, we used to have a circle and stuff. And he had this thing in him. You see, he's got this wild streak in him. So I thought he would make a good DJ. Then I would bring you, put you next to me. I would say, I'm going to the toilet. Carry on. And I would sit in the toilet and I would listen. And I'll see that you're doing okay and I'll leave you. And the moment you drop, I'll come back and take up the levels again. Take up the levels again. And I would scout. I taught them well. You know? So from the DJs that I've had, I mean, once there was a DJ that came to traffic lights, and there was a DJ that's supposed to come from America, that Brooke. We used to call him Brooke Bond. He had a thing in the Mohegan. We're sitting at the club and we're thinking, oh, this club has got a guy from America coming to them now. Now in those days, if you're coming from America, it's like, you know what I'm saying, like a guy. So anyway, the guy went there the first week. We didn't know him. We didn't even see him. It was just in the paper. The next week, the guy comes knocking on our door. So we all say, hey, this is cool. He's coming to us now. He's there with us. So I said to him, can you play? Yes. I said, okay. Go and play, they let me hear. This man couldn't play to save his life. And he ended up cleaning the club instead of DJing. Because now you've got to start all over again. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? We can school you, but you've got to start somewhere. And he couldn't play to save his life, coming from America.